All right, cam degreeing. Yeah, here you can see some of my setup. Over the years, I've improved my equipment. Like originally, this was my degree wheel, and you can see the size difference, and you can see how much resolution you gain by having a bigger wheel. The bigger your wheel, the greater your accuracy. And accuracy, I mean, if you can't do this reasonably accurate, then you're just wasting time for the most part. So here I have a degree wheel that's actually attached with a hub that goes onto the crank, so it's like a crank socket and a degree wheel mounting bracket. I've got a lifter jig with a dial indicator that reads directly on the cam lobe. This is my deck bridge. The deck bridge is to help me determine top dead center. Over the years, this is sort of my degreeing kit. This is the hub for doing LS engines, Chevy engines, Pontiac engines, and some others. I keep the Pontiac, small block Chevy, keep some of the tools I need. I have a magnetic base. I've got some other little, I use these more when I first started. I've got a variety of adjustable push rods. I'm doing a flat tappet cam. This goes into my lifter jig. Right now I've got the rounded one. I've got a notebook and pen, so when I'm traveling I can take my notes. And anyway, yeah, before I had this, I'd have to set up the magnetic base and then put a lifter in here and use a push rod, or try to get the dial indicator down in there. And doing all of that, you have things at different angles, and the more complications you have, the more things moving up and down, the more places you have for error. So like yesterday, when I first put this in, it's got two sizes. This is like the like GM lifters, but the Mopar lifters are bigger diameter, and I'd only use this on GMs until this engine. And so I put it in, I had the smaller size in, and as I was rotating the motor, I noticed it was wiggling. Like, oh shoot, I gotta switch it over. So I had to switch it over. And a little note about this. So this is a rounded follower to simulate a roller cam, the roller on the camshaft, on the lifter rather. It's not exact. It's not going to be the same diameter and the same curvature of your roller lifter. And as such, it throws the geometry off a little bit. Now at peak, it's still going to be peak, but like your 50 numbers, if you're trying to see what your duration at 50 lift is, and you're using this jig, and that rounded end being different, most likely, than your lifter, it's going to alter your 50 specs. So if you're trying to measure like duration at 50, you cannot do that with this fixture, not accurately. You have to put a lifter, one of your actual lifters in, and hook it up. You use a dial indicator, magnetic base to hold it and everything, and then that's going to be your best bet, other than using Cam Doctor or something like that. Okay, I thought I was going to have somebody here to help me video, but they got tied up, so we're on our own here. So I'm going to demonstrate how I checked my degree wheel to be at 0. And then if everything goes right, I'm going to demonstrate different ways that you can try to get your intake centerline, your ICL reading. So pardon me as I walk back and forth. Some of this you probably just have to take my word for what I'm doing here, because you probably can't see all these gauges perfectly. Maybe you can, I'm not sure. All right, so first I'm going to come up. All right, so dial indicator's coming up. Okay, so that's my max lift. So I'm close to top dead center, and here it looks like I'm pretty close as well, but I'm going to back off. And so I always do all of my checks clockwise. The engine rotates clockwise. If there's any slop in the chain, rotating clockwise is going to take that slop out. If you start trying to go backwards, then the slop can go the other way and throw your readings off. So if you ever shoot a reading and you need to go counterclockwise, go further extra back, pardon my English there, and then come back clockwise to get your reading. Don't back up to the reading, back up past it and then go clockwise to reach the reading. All right, so right here, I'm a little over 12 degrees ahead of advancing top dead center. So my piston's coming up. I'm going to get a reading at 0 here. So I'm at 0, and my pointer is right at 7 degrees past top dead center, or advanced from top dead center. Now keep going, it reaches the max. Now it's coming back, piston's coming back down. All right, back to 0. All right, and so now this is reading 11. So I had 7 a while ago, now I have 11. So that's 4 degrees difference, right? Yeah, so I'm 2 degrees off. So I'm gonna make a 2 degree alteration here. All right. So this is snug, but this wheel will still move a little bit. When I point about using this, you see I've got it mounted on the center line. See if you can see this or not. Piston will rock a little bit. These are hyper-eutectics, they fit tight. They don't wiggle much. Some forged pistons, you'll have a lot of wiggle to them. And if you measure from the top to the bottom of the piston will rock. And as you're going up and down, it could rock one way going up and then rock the other way going down. And you get inaccurate reading. But this is the center line of the piston. So this is like the pivot point. So if you're over here, you got a lot of movement. But if you're in the middle of the pivot, you have very, very little movement. So I'm not going to have a reading that gets skewed much from the up-down movement if I'm keeping this in the middle of the piston. All right, so I made an adjustment. Let me back up. And for giggles, so I read it at 0 a while ago. I'm going to read it at 90 right now. So 90 is right at 10 degrees. Pretty much dead on. Back to 90. Okay. I'm past 10 degrees. I'm like 11.4 degrees right here. So I'm still off a little bit. So I didn't move it enough a while ago. All right, so I made another little tweak. go back counterclockwise too much. And we're going to come back up. I'm going to go back to read. I'm going to read 0 again this time. So I'm 0 on the piston. I'm 10.5 degrees here. Excuse me, wrong. I'm 9.5. Back, and I'm at maybe 9.4 almost. So I'm within 1/10 of a degree of getting the same reading. So that's about as accurate as you can hope to get. So I'm pretty darn close to being dead 0. So let me, just for giggles, I'm gonna back up. We can kind of watch this. So that's 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. And that's starting to go down. 1, 2. So visually verifying we're dead on, top dead center here. So I'm feeling good about my measurements. Now I'm going to be as careful as I can about not bumping this wheel, because just a little bit of a bump can move it just a little bit, and that's going to throw my readings off. And I don't want that. Okay. All right, so at this point you're just going to have to trust me on my readings, as I'm looking at my lifter jig. I'm zeroing it. All right. So I made myself a little chart. And what I'm hoping to demonstrate here is most of these modern cam lobes are not symmetrical. And so depending on how you're taking your measurements, it can kind of skew what your ICL reading will be at the end. So I'm going to take lift measurements as we're on the opening side of the lobe, and then I'm going to take them for the same distances on the closing side. And the averages will show what the theoretical intake centerline is. All right. So let me. And I just hit that when I said I had to be careful. So let me put that somewhere else. And since I hit this, I'm going to just follow my own words from earlier and recheck my 0. Okay, 0 degrees, 9.5. So that's what we had a while ago, so it should be the same. And 9.5. So I was lucky I didn't screw up my degree wheel on that one, but that was a close call, and makes me realize that, okay, I don't need to put my notepad down below this. I'll put it over here to the side, and so I can just be more careful. One other thing to note, you may notice it's pretty easy for me to spin this motor over. I only have the #1 piston installed at this time. The motor is just a lot smoother to turn over when you only have the 1 piston. So that's one of my things when I'm building a motor. I install the #1 piston, then I install the cam, and I degree the cam at that point. It just makes it a lot smoother. When you have all 8 pistons, you'll have spots whereas the pistons are changing directions and stuff, and you don't get as smooth of a pull on your wrench. All right, so my lifter jig is zeroed. Our degree wheel is zeroed. Pay attention to the numbers on the degree wheel. It doesn't go to 360. It goes to 180 this way and it goes to 180 this way. That can confuse people. And it makes it where sometimes people get the math wrong on some of this stuff. Okay, just there. The intake starting to open, and you can kind of see here, it says here this is the expected range for when an intake will start to open. So 10, 20, 30, 40, 48, 49, so that's 50 thousandths lobe lift, and our reading here's 0, and we're 3.5 degrees for 4, top dead center. Here's 3, here's 4, and we're right in the middle. So I'm going to mark down the opening. Negative 3.5. Okay. So I'll go to okay, so that's 100 lobe lift. And so now we're on the positive side. So we're at 10, 11, and you have to sort of extrapolate. I'm going to say it's 11.8 degrees. $150. We're at 150, and we are at 24, just past that. I'm going to say 24.2. All right, we're at 200. And we're at 35, 36, about 36.6. So now that's right on 50. So 250 lobe lift. It's 50. All right, so now we're at 300. 65, 66. It's a little bit past 66. I'm going to give this one 66.3. All right, so now we're coming, this lobe is 352 or 353 max lift. So we're starting to get to where we're on the nose of the cam. So I'm going to take some shorter measurements now. We've been skipping 50 thousandths between each measurement. Now we're going to measure 10,000 increments. Alright, so that's 310 lift, and we are at 70, about 70.4. We're going to go to 320. All right, 320 gives us pretty much 75 on the nose. Go to 330. Okay, 330, and we are 80. I want to say 80.4. At 340 now. Coming up real close to the very tip of the cam lobe. So we are at 87. I'm not going to take any more until I start coming back down. So 351, 352, a little past 352. I'm just touching this just to make sure in road zone not to rock that. Just to make sure that the dial indicator is following the cam lobe on the closing side. It's moving nicely. All right, so we're at 340. So 340, we've moved a bunch of duration just to go back down to 340. So 120. 125, 126, it's like 126.8. So at this point, we could take the 87, the 126.8, let's see, that's 0.8, 7, 6, it's 3, 8, 2, 10, 1, so 8, 3. Yeah, so that's 213.8, which is almost 214, right? So that would be roughly 107. So that should be what the intake centerline is reading right now, based on 340 numbers. But we'll check that a little bit more in depth here in a minute. So 330 is 134. 220 is 139.4. 310 is 144.2. 300 is 148 and 48.5. All right, so now we're going to drop down to 250. All right, we're at 166. Now pay attention, we're at 166 and we're at 170, then we'll be at 180. What comes after 180? Is it 170 or is it 190? So we're at 200 and we are at 180.2. So we need to keep counting in the direction we're going. So 180, 190, 200. So now we're at 180, 190, 193.5. Back to 100. So 180, 190, 200, 206.8. We're back to 50 thousandths on the closing side. All right, so this is reading 50 thousandths. I'm just going to touch this, make sure that it's following. Everything's perfect. I didn't change any of my readings, so we're still good there. And 180, 190, 200, 210, 220, 221, 222, looks like 222.4. So these are my readings. Now here is something that can save you some issues going down the road when you're trying to figure out why your numbers don't make sense. We're going to finish this by verifying that our wheel is still at 0. I've had this, the camera's been on here the whole time. This has been a non-stop take, so there was no shenanigans. You saw I may have slightly bumped the wheel a time or two. Everything should be great, but we're going to verify. The 0 mark there, which is actually like 100 thousandths below the top of the deck, and I'm at 9.5, and if I remember right from earlier, that was the same number we had. So keep going and come back to the 0, which again is 100 thousandths below deck height. And again, I'm at 9.5. So we zeroed the wheel before we started. I took all of my measurements, and once I was finished, I zeroed the wheel again to verify. So my degree wheel is in the same position now as it was when I started. So my numbers should be pretty darn valid. So I'm going to shut the camera off for a minute so I can use the calculator, do the math, and then we'll take a look at the results. Okay, I think this is sort of interesting, and maybe you will as well. So basically, you just watched me take all these measurements. You can probably zoom in if you're on your computer to verify these numbers as I recorded them. But if we're trying to determine intake centerline by 50 thousandths lift, we're at 109.5, 109.5 degrees, and that's right at where I wanted this camshaft to be. Then as we go to 100, it drops to 109.30, 109.85, 108.40, 108, 107.40, 107. There's a definite trend here. And so in the past, a lot of times I just got numbers on either side of the max lift, like the 310, 320, 330, and use those numbers. And if I was just using that, I would say, oh, this cam's installed at a 107. But a lot of these modern cams are asymmetrical. And that means the opening side and the closing side are shaped differently. And what you can have is that one side is more aggressive than the other side. And that's going to throw these numbers off and maybe even skew where the actual peak of that lobe is, where it may dwell on the closing side, or it may get to the max lift early and dwell on the opening side and then close quicker. Without a cam doctor or something to do some really close examining of the cam, you don't really know. I'm going to say the most accurate way is to use the 50 thousandths method. And just be aware when you do that, that you're going to have readings before, see, your intake. Okay, that's open, exhaust open, intake zero. Where'd it go? Oh yeah, in the intake opening, your 50 thousandths is probably going to be over here somewhere. And so it's going to be a negative number. And then you're over 180 degrees. So when you get down here, and then the numbers start getting smaller again, you have to realize that 180, that's not 170, that's 190, that's 200. You have to add these black numbers. 180 plus 20 is 200. 180 plus 30 is 210. 220. So just keep that in mind as you're doing your process and you're recording your numbers. Make sure you're, if you wrote down, if you were right here and you wrote down 60 instead of 200, and up here, this is where you started, you wrote down 5 instead of -5, you're going to get some crazy numbers that will not match up to your cam. So just be cognizant of how the degree wheel is numbered and what you're actually measuring, whether it's a negative or a positive, and whether you need to add to the 180 or not.